Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Environmental Impact Assessment. In the previous lectures, we saw origin of EIA in US and its worldwide development. So today we will be covering, we'll be looking at how what's the current state of EIA in India and we'll map it at the global context. Further, we'll look at the initial environmental movement in India so that we understand what is our perspective, what challenges we have, and how far we have moved on this line. Further, we'll also side by side also look at the evolution of EIA in India. So the expected learning outcomes, what we see is like you should be able to contextualize EIA in India on the global context. You should be able to describe the initial environmental movement in the country. Further, you should be able to describe the evolution of EIA in Indian context. So let us first locate India with respect to EIA with the developed countries as well as developing countries, and this particular session is taken from UN Training Manual. So looking at comparing developed countries, developing countries and India, we see with respect to EIA legislation, we see in the developed countries, EIA legislation is very well framed. For example, we can see it in Canada. It has Canada Environmental Assessment Act regulates EIA, as well as you see the EU countries are also guided by directive on EIA. So their legislations are very well framed as they have started at the initial level. Whereas in the developing countries, you see that there's most often in many of the countries, there's lack of formal EIA legislation. For instance, EIA is not mandatory in many of the African countries. While in India, you will see that there's a formal legislation for EIA. It has been enacted by making an amendment in the Environmental Protection Act of 1986. The prevalent act is EIA Notification 2006, and right now we have a draft which is 2020, which is under consideration. So moving on to the other aspect, when we look at EIA regarding public and government involvement, we see that in the developed countries, as per this review, what we see is there is active involvement of all participants in the process of public involvement, including like you see competent authority, all the stakeholders are involved, the government agencies are involved, and even the affected people are involved at a very early stage of the EIA. So process we see is also more robust and gives a fair idea of the issues which are there from the very beginning of the inception of the project. And likewise, when we talk about the developing countries, there's limited involvement of the public and the government agencies in the initial phases, though there is some involvement at the later stage. So because of this, it often results in poor representation of the issues and impacts in report, and which adversely negatively affects the quality of the report. So if people are not involved, government is also, their engagement is less and lesser in the initial period, then there's a lot of things which are left out, and it eventually impacts the quality of the report. Whereas when we see in India, we have public and government agencies involvement, but what is reviewed is that there's limited involvement at the initial level of the process. So which also leads to a lot of confusion or complex situation at the later stage. So looking at the another aspect, that is integrated approach to EIA. So while we see how integrated our approach is in concern with EIA, we see that all aspects, including social and health, are taken into account. While in the developing countries, it's mostly focuses on the geophysical aspects, and other social and health aspects are not well considered. As well, when we look at India, we see that we have expanded a lot in many domains as socioeconomic impact assessments and other things, but still there are limitations to what we have expanded to, like for example, landscape and visual impacts have been not yet considered in the process. Further, we see that when we look at the alternatives in EIA, how alternatives are really considered in EIA process. When we say alternatives, we mean like how many options, how many proposals we are really looking into in terms of the design alternatives, in terms of location alternatives. So when we take a look at EIA process from that perspective, we see that in the developed countries, there's proper consideration and all the alternatives are evaluated. Further, we see in the developing countries, it's more or less absent, and our case is also not that developed in terms of evaluating the alternatives. So, looking at the another aspects of EIA, looking at the process and especially the screening part of the process. So we see that in developed countries, it's very well defined. For instance, in EU countries, competent authorities decide whether EIA is required after seeking advice from the developers, NGOs, and statutory consultants. And in Japan, we see that the screening decision is made by the authorizing agency with respect to the certain criteria which are available to them, as same applies with Canada as well, where federal authority determines whether an environmental assessment is required or not. And in case of developing countries, when they do what process they really adopt is like here's the screening practice is said to be considerably weak. In most cases, there is a list of activities that require EIA. And also in that list, also many a times, the threshold limit values are not really specified. Whereas when we look at India, we also do it by screening is done by the list. And our list has certain threshold value in terms of the size, nature of the project. So on that basis, the screening is done. So the advantage of this, though we do it by this list method, it saves considerable amount of time, and it also avoids a lot of litigation which might come upon. So there are double advantage of going by list. It gives clarity, it saves time, and because it's clear, it avoids a lot of litigation which might arrive because of interpretation or the decisions which is made by the committee. So looking at the other part of the process, the next, if you can recollect, we studied about the various stages of the process. So that was first one was of the screening. And if we look at the scoping process, so in scoping process, what usually when we look towards the developed countries, there's like comprehensive process. It is said to involve a lot of consultants, and it engages well with the stakeholders in and it's the countries like US, Netherlands, Canada, and Europe. The involvement of public and their concerns are addressed in the scoping exercise. So at the very beginning, like we said, public participation is addressed, the public is involved at the very beginning of it. So here you see that at the scoping level also the public consultation takes place. And we also see that the funding organizations such as World Bank, ADB, and ERDB have provision for consultation with the affected people and NGOs during the identification of the issues in scoping exercise. So what the review suggests that it's very well defined, the process. So by looking at the developing countries, the review suggests that it's like really poorly defined, and including many countries like China and Pakistan, there is no provision for scoping. So in some countries like in Nigeria and Indonesia, a term of reference TOR is followed for scoping, while in some countries like Ghana, Taiwan, and Chile, a general checklist is followed. So in countries where it is undertaken, there is no public consultation during scoping. In most developing countries, scoping is often directed towards meeting pollution control requirements. So mostly it's the geophysical environment it's looked at, rather than addressing the wide range of issues which you saw in our previous class. So when considering India in terms of scoping process, earlier scoping was done by consultant or proponents with an inclination towards meeting pollution control requirements. And in the same way, it was not really meeting the wider goal. So we see that with the amendments now this process has improved, and there are a lot of wide range of aspects which are now covered in EIA. And the terms of reference, we have a standard reference TOR, as well as it's also provided by the respective authority. So looking at another component of EIA, we look at the report. So the quality of report, the content of report. So what is suggested by this review is that most reports are in local language in the developed countries, whereas in the developing countries, most reports are in English and not in the local language. So you think how much it is really able to reach to the people. So in India as well, most reports are in English, and they are not really in the local language, but we see that executive summary is translated into local languages now. So further looking at the another aspects of EIA, a multidisciplinary approach, we see that in case of developed countries, the involvement of experts with expertise is considerably high with different areas. Whereas that's not the same in case of developing countries. In India, we see that a preparation of EIA is done by consultants. The selection criteria for organization is very much is guided by the cost, but our system has evolved a lot, and a lot of certification and things have come in place now. So moving further, we see that in case of reviewing and monitoring, so there are like two tiers of EIA reviews in case of developed countries. So one is conducted after the completion of EIA to check the adequacy and effectiveness of EIA, and the second is before the decision making. So there's two sets of review, and here the review suggests that in developing countries it's mostly the review system is one stage, as well as only monitoring is done. And in India, EIA review is now we have a specific system of how the review has to be done. The review agency called the Impact Assessment Agency, they undertake this process, and a lot of process have now been streamlined. So, looking at another aspect like the expertise and capacity building in EIA. So, for any EIA to undertake, we need human resource who can really take care of it. So, how is the scenario for that? So, we see that in developed countries, the like International Association for Impact Assessment and other organization demonstrate that there are large number of individuals with the capability to design. So since it started from there, so they have learned in the process and a lot of capacity building has been done. So there's a pool of human resource, whereas in developing countries, there's lesser human resource which is available to undertake the EIA process. And in India, the training for EIA has started for some decades now, so we have considerable resource pool in this regard. So that was about the where we really stand in terms of all the parameters considering EIA. So we have streamlined considerably. Public participation is also considerably good at this moment, at this time, as well as we see that human resource is good and the process is streamlined here. So that is how we see from the entire all the aspects, like where do we really place ourselves. So this is what the study tells us. So let us now see how did we reach here and what stand we kept in the process. So at certain point in time we adopted EIA, and then but the concern for environment was from very beginning. So let's quickly look at those environmental movement in India. So taking from the writings of Nabhi on environmental movement in India, so we see that if you can recollect, we talked about all the events and we're going to talk that again. We'll frequently revisit that. So the institutionalization, formation of bodies of global environment concerns within the United Nations system had started, and it started with the establishment of the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, during the Stockholm Conference in 1970s. So that time it started and a body institutionalization started happening. And at the same time, you also see that Brundtland Commission report had also further strengthened the process of making this environmental movement at the global level, taking it to the global level. And all of these were starting making powerful impact on the global policy making. So how we were moving, how we target to address. So it was having a considerable impact on that. So in India too, during the time, there was a strong emergence of environmental movement to save the natural resources. So our journey starts much before that. So natural resource, we started addressing to natural resource like land, water, aquatic wealth, forest, wildlife, and air, fossil fuels. And we were looking at the rapid depletion and pollution at our country also. So mass movements were prominent in our context and were raising concerns for environmental issues. So the people here in the country were questioning the process, like we were really targeting towards development. So people, community, normal people were asking questions about the ends and means of natural resource management, how we were really managing our natural resources, how we were moving towards industrialization, and the distribution of the resources within when we looked at sustainability, equality and justice, so how we were really looking at that. So the agenda of these environmental movements, if we look at, was rooted in the communities who were dependent on on all these resources like forests, water, land, for the right to life and livelihood. So all these people, the people initiated this movement. And if you may recollect, we saw the US journey, so saying that similar in the lines that environmental movement in India uh, must be understood in the perspective and their emergence as a like we need to see that there was a lot of symbiotic relationship. We were like we have been till now. We are more dependent on agriculture, forest resources. Okay, so there exists a lot of symbiotic relationship between human and nature. And if we see the movements were led by Dalits, tribals, forest and hill dwellers, peasants, the farmers, the fisher folk, fishermen, women, who were defining their struggles, and then they were the ones to create this movement here. So it was from this community background, from this group of people, that it was from this group of people, from the society, that the entire country was getting the momentum. It was trying to understand. The environmentalism was being popularized. It was, the concept was introduced to them. So let us see how did we reach here and what stand we kept in the process. So first look at the initial environmental movement in India. So taking from the writings of Umar Nabi on environmental movements in India, we see that when we compare, we saw that in USA, Silent Spring, the population bomb, Cuyahoga, a river fire created a movement. So that what we had seen while we were looking at the USA. In India too, during the time, there was strong emergence of environmental movements to save natural resources, land, water, aquatic wealth, forest and wildlife. And there was movement to save all these from the rapid depletion and pollution. And there was mass movements which were prominent, and they were raising concerns for environmental issues. So the communities were questioning the means through which the development was addressed. So we were really focusing on development and how it has been addressed. It was really questioned by the communities, how the natural resource management was taking place in the context of sustainability, in the context of equality and justice. So all these were questions. So these questions and concerns were causing environmental movement in the country. And these movements came from the communities who were dependent on these natural resources for the right to life and livelihood. So in Indian context, the relationship with the environment was much more symbiotic. There was close human and nature relationship, and we have been much more have been an agrarian society. So these movements and struggles were led and were defined by mostly Dalits, tribals, forest and hill dwellers, the peasants, fisher folk and women. So it was this group of people we are talking about who created the sensitivity concept of environmentalism, created the discourse for larger community in the country. So just to have a reference to understand the context, like what was really happening in a landscape, we will look at the Tilari Matre Day of May 30, 1930. So Tilari Kand, which Kand, when we say Kand, we mean meaning incident, emerges from forest settlement of 1927-28. So you look at the revolts happening from that time. In this, forest boundaries were redrawn, the administrative aspect, and encroachment was made on the old and established cattle pastures. So this caused great anger among the people. The stressed local people set fire to a part of the forest in May 20, 1930. The district forest officers arrested the leaders, but the agitated local people fled them while proceeding towards Tehri. Then the army surrounded the protesters and opened fired, killing many. So now you can see that the memorial is created at Tilari, which is like 2.5 kilometer in Barkot, Uttarakhand. So these sequential events, like this was constantly happening, and you can also see the timeline there. So these sequential events, years later, following widespread of destructing flood in Alaknanda Valley in Chamoli, and simultaneously you're seeing at the global level there's institutionalization of global environmental concerns at the United Nations Environmental Programme at Stockholm Conference and the Brundtland Commission report. So all these was taking place simultaneously, you see, and then it was reinforcing each other. We also learned that Swami Chidanandji, a spiritual leader who was also traveling from the conference to the country, also strengthened the movement. And we see that there was Chipko movement where women hugged the trees to stop its felling for protecting their environment. So you see how there was a question about equality, there was question about justice, the environment, and also you're seeing the linkages with the disaster here. So it is also important to look at nations' stand at the United Nations Conference on Human Environment held in Stockholm. So this also helps us to understand, to understand what stand we kept, what landscape we were in. There were challenges as a nation and how we perceived development and the environment. So, and what it really meant for us to undertake the environmental concerns. So there were a lot of environmental concerns, but what it would really cost us. In order to understand, we'll look at this, and we will be looking at the keynote address of then Prime Minister Mrs. Indira Gandhi in the conference, where she powerfully outlined the hopes and the fears of the developing countries in response to the prevailing understanding of environmental priorities. So there was a lot of emphasis given on the environment, but as a developing countries, how much we could really do and what it would cost us. So the environmental issues that largely emerged from industrial development were put into a more realistic framework so that the basic cause of the environmental degradation in the poor and underdeveloped countries could be identified and tackled. So, listening, just taking from her keynote, we see that she said the environmental problems of developing countries are not the side effects of the excessive industrialization. So it is not really the side effects of industrialization, but it's the reflect of inadequacy of development. So if the development, the sustainable development would happen, they would be really able to take care of the environmental problems. And comparing it with the rich countries may look upon development as a cause of environmental destruction, but to us, meaning the developing countries, it is one of the primary means of improving the environment for living or providing food, water, sanitation and shelter, or making the desert green and the mountain habitable. So, an interpretation of the statement suggests that the degradation of the environment is not merely a question of pollution generated by industrial activities, it is also a complete concept of quality of human life. So, it's just not the pollution, it's also the quality of life. So, destruction of forest, erosion of soils, depletion of wildlife, accumulation of waste, and then migration to the urban areas. These all were considered to be indicators of underdevelopment, as well as if you'll see the disease, dirt, hunger, malnutrition, all of these. So the concept of environment in developing countries like India brings a vision of society where the human settlements would be healthy, drinking water would be easily accessible, sanitary conditions will be on acceptable level, and society will be able to provide basic opportunity to its members to live in dignity. So that's what we were looking at as a concept. So further, we also see that Mrs. Indira Gandhi also highlighted the developments with conservation. What does it really means to us? What really has to be prioritized and what should not be done. So we, in the Indian context, we further see that NGOs played a very important role in developing and enhancing the people's attitude and creating the scientific knowledge and technical skills here. So like another key movements in this, like we saw the Chipko Andolan. So another key movement, especially in terms of EIA, was the Silent Valley movement, about which we will see in detail as well. So the Silent Valley movement stands out as one of the most important milestone in shaping the public opinion. So how public came together, as well as the formation of the official policy. So this particular case had a key role to play. The Silent Valley hydroelectric project in Kerala is the only scheme which has was at that time was the only scheme which was halted on the environmental grounds. So this project was not undertaken on the environmental concerns. So similarly, we see Narmada Bachao Andolan. And if you look at it, the major problem associated with was about there were many damages like large-scale deforestation, loss of flora and fauna, and then the waterlogging and salinity, the range of problems which we have already discussed. So these were one of the major problems associated with that. Likewise, we also see the opposition for the Tehri project, the height of the project and the displacement which was happening because of that. So this also raised a lot of environmental concerns and environmental movement. We see another movement which was related with sea turtles and their conservation in Gahir Mata in Bhitarkanika Marine Sanctuary in Orissa. So another one is the Chilka Bachao Andolan we see. So all this was happening where the conflicts was seen about the dependency of various stakeholders on the resources. If you can see the recollect the diagram which we had studied before. And now all these movements led to that, and recently you must have seen the Alpha Serene apartment which was built on the coastal zone in Kochi, how it was pulled down due to the violation of coastal regulation zone at Maradu. That was done in 2020. So how strongly we have come up from the initial movement to now application of EIA. So I've not covered all the parts here, but just picking up few of the important milestones to understand the context, the landscape here in the country. So now let us look at the legal part of EIA evolution and the process part of evolution in India. So in India, the first EIA was ordered. So if like the Silent River Valley. So during in 1980, while considering the Silent River Valley hydroelectric project, which was a controversial project, this case marked like a new beginning in India, and since then EIA was extended to other activities also. So and was also extended to larger public sector project requiring public investment board clearance. So this was a key case, like I said before. So we're going to just spend a few moments on this one. So this project, Silent River Valley hydroelectric project, it was proposed. The proponent of this project was Kerala State Electricity Board, and the project involved like 130-meter high dam across Kuntipuza River and a reservoir. So the problem was that the dam was considered a big threat to the biodiversity and the forest ecosystem of the Silent Valley. And then the consequences of the opposition was that in 1985, the project was abandoned and the Silent Valley was declared as a national park. So this case marked a new beginning in India, and since then EIA was extended to the other activities as well. So, if you would look at the key argument, like what was the conflict here? So, the key argument from the proponent of the dam, so that you understand the complexity involved, proponents of the dam, Kerala State Electricity Board, was that it would generate electricity for the state of Kerala. It would generate electricity for the state of Kerala with installation of 4 units of 60 megawatt each, and then they claimed that the state's electricity requirements will be not met without this additional power, so that it was needed. It would irrigate additional areas and provide employment to several people. And whereas, so this is what the proponents were arguing, then the conservationists argued that the entire lower valley will be submerged by the dam and it will destroy its biodiversity. And there was also the political intervention, and in 1981 giving up to there was a lot of public pressure. So Mrs. Indira Gandhi declared that Silent Valley will be protected. However, it was not protected, but then there were intervention, and eventually the project was abandoned. And it was in 1983 that the Silent Valley hydroelectric project was called off, and then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi inaugurated Silent Valley National Park in 1985. So we'll discuss about the status of EIA in India from the perspective of statutory provision. So this is the case we see where EIA really came into where it was first implemented and the project was halted because of applying this EIA, and as well as the people coming together. So that's why that case is very important. So and from this, the EIA was aligned with others. So now looking at the status of EIA in India from the perspective of statutory provision, administrative structure, and the procedural arrangement, we see that environmental management issues, like we have already seen that it came into existence in 1972, and especially when National Committee on Environmental Planning and Coordination (NCEPC) was constituted following the Stockholm Conference, and this was constituted under the Department of Science and Technology. So the Planning Commission directed this NCEPC to undertake EIA for this particular project, and this later Department of Environment was established as per the recommendation of NCEPC in 1980, and which was finally converted to full-fledged Ministry of Environment and Forests years later. So you see that the Ministry of Environment and Forest enacted the Environmental Protection Act of 1986, which is an umbrella act covering various environmental aspects. So under EPA 1986, an EIA notification 1994 was brought out, making this notification made EIA mandatory for a particular group of activities. So this notification not only specifies the types of activities requiring EIA, but also fixes a time schedule for whole process. It also defines the role of MOEF, like the authority, what it will do in the entire process. So with this, like the project like mining, industries, hydroelectric plant, all this came under the purview of EIA. One of the major amendments made was to introduce public hearing procedure in 1997. And in this, it outlined the process of conducting public hearing, how the public hearing has to be done, and how the reports have to be submitted to which authority. So that was made clear. And then the environmental clearance process was made clear. And then related standards were created, like Water Prevention Control Act, Air Prevention and Control Act, Noise Pollution Control Rules. So all these were set up. You will also find hazardous waste management and handling rules. So all these were created. So that was the statutory aspect of the EIA. Now looking at the administrative framework. So the existing environmental clearance process is now in two layers system involving both central and the state authority. So there's also central authority as well as state authority, which you can see in the figure. At the central level, Impact Assessment Division IA undertakes the under the regional offices of the ministry, and also with the help of Central Pollution Control Board, all these like Impact Assessment Division, then CPCB and ministry, all these three important institutions, they are responsible for this. And you also see the State Pollution Control Board and State Department of Environment are working at the province level. So you see at the central level, you see Impact Assessment Division, ministries, the Central Pollution Control Board, whereas at the state level you see State Pollution Control Board, Department of Environment. So these work at the state level. So there are defined roles for the agency for assessment, as well as you will find it gives a clear role for the process, how the process will be identified. Then you also see the role of CPCB, and it's an autonomous organization under the administrative control of the ministry. So its purpose is to guide and to make standards and support it. It's not really directly involved in the environmental clearance process. So you similarly see that there's a defined role for Department of Environment and also for State Pollution Control Board. Likewise, you also see that there are regional offices for the Ministry of Environment and Forest. So now looking at the procedural framework. So the whole process of environmental clearance involves many ministries and departments. The process starts when project proponents applies for NOC to the respective state pollution control boards or other local authorities. So as per the local context. So the site clearance is required for some of the activities such as the mining and so on. So all those processes have to be followed. So you can see here the environmental clearance process which is followed in India. You can see how the application process takes place, the site clearance process takes place, and NOCs are given, and then how the entire process takes place, and then the decision in the end is made, so like whether the project is to be accepted or not. So if you look at broader category, EIA process is divided in three basic steps. So one is the preparation of EIA, and then the other is about the review and decision making, and then the third is the post-project monitoring. And public hearing also is considerable here. Indian system provides an opportunity to involve affected people and vulnerable groups to develop terms of reference for EIA, and their concerns are made are involved in the considered in the process. So we see that there's a well-defined legal structure in the country. And then there's also a presence of all the regulatory structure also. But if we look at the weakness of our system, EIA practice in India is restricted to project level. So EIA is only at the project level and has a lot of weaknesses in terms of it's seen as merely a requirement for the clearance purpose. And still it is said to be, the reviewers suggest that the screening and scoping processes are not well defined in the country, leading to a lot of other complications, as well as we see that there's a lot of problems about the insufficiency of the baseline data which is available. And also there is inconsistent application of evaluation and predictive tools. About the methods also there is inconsistency. And then there are limitation or there are issues about monitoring and implementation also. And we also see that there is inadequacy of public participation as well. And even the quality of EIA report is also said to be not of that the desired quality. And further, we also see that since EIA process need involvement of a lot of people, there's a lack of coordination among various authorities, and then there is the coordination and decision making is poorly defined. So in the image here, you can see the EIA process in India again and see how the entire process takes place here. So looking at how many projects we have really done. So this is taken from the annual report of 2021, and in which you see the environmental clearance which has done from January 2020 to December 2020. You can see the number of industry, infrastructure, mining, thermal, river valley and nuclear defense projects which have been cleared so far. So you see that with this also shows that number of projects which are meeting the environmental criteria and how the process has been going on. So in this image you also see the sector wise list of environmental clearance here. So you see as per the sector how different projects are being cleared. So this is the list which we follow for the clearance purpose. You can see the category A and B and C. So the category A is taken care by the central government and category B is taken care by the state government. So this is the list which you see of all the elements which are there. So, so this is what we saw about Indian context. So summarizing like what we really covered today. So we saw how the compared to the other countries, how EIA is there in India, and then we also described the initial environmental movement, and then we also saw like currently what act is there in place, and then what kind of process is followed, and then what's the strength of it, and how many projects we have been really able to clear, what indicators we see here. So that was all what we covered today, and then these are the references which we used, and then our coverage was not it's limited with the time we have in hand. So there are certain suggested watch and read for your purpose if you want to explore more. And please feel free to ask questions. Let us know about any concerns you have. Do share your opinion, experiences and suggestions. Looking forward to interacting and co-learning with you while exploring EIA. Thank you.